What is up, everybody, and welcome to the channel. If you don't already know, I'm hosting a tattoo competition series, and at the end of December, I put up this video. The contest is well underway. We've already received a handful of submissions, but I've got even bigger news. I'm teaming up with Skin & Ink magazine, and not only will the winner be featured online, but you will get your very own spread in the magazine as well. That's right, you'll be featured in one of the biggest tattoo magazines currently in rotation. We also have a few new sponsors on board. Bull Airs is offering up a pair of custom sneakers, and these things are badass. The winner will also now receive a year's supply of second skin bandages, a year's supply of hive caps, and a year's supply of MD wipeouts. You'll be stocked up on Mad Rabbit Artist Glide, world famous ink, and let's not forget a brand new machine from Bishop and a full tray setup from Ghost Tattoo Company. And one more thing, a free booth at this year's Third Coast Tattoo Convention here in Chicago. This is literally thousands of dollars in prizes. I think I gotta slow down here, otherwise I'm gonna have to give away a car soon. I'm just kidding, I'm not giving away a car. Yet. But in all seriousness, you have until January 10th to submit your hand and snake tattoo. We'll go over those submissions on my YouTube channel and we will whittle it down to a top 3 from there. The 3 judges have been locked in. We have Deanna James from Dallas, Texas, Tom Bullman from Cortland, New York, and last but not least, Gian Carley from Concord, New Hampshire. These guys have years of experience in the industry and know exactly what to look for. I am over the moon about this contest, guys. This is gonna be huge. Good luck to everyone, and I'll send another update soon. Well, the submissions are in, and to say the least, we were a little overwhelmed. We had over 200 submissions, and as much as I'd love to critique each and every one of these, we're just not gonna have the time. We're still gonna show them all, we're just gonna have to get through them pretty quick. So stick with us, it's gonna be a long one. Now, before we get started, I do need to address a few things. There were a handful of submissions that were empty, didn't go along with the prompt, or were just a drawing. So if you don't see yours here, go back and check the email because that's probably why. By the end of this video, I'm gonna whittle all the submissions down to my favorite 10. From there, I will hopefully pick my favorite 2 for the finals, and the third place will be up to you guys. So I need you to check out each and every submission and comment below your top 3. This part is very important. Once the video airs, you will only have 48 hours to vote. So let's start climbing this mountain. All right, number 1 is sent in from Fronkie. All right, not bad. The colors are bold. You did send in another one as well. And to be honest, this one just comes off as fairly scratchy. Next, we have one from Ilona. Speaking of scratchy, this one takes the cake. Now, I'm not gonna get ahead of myself, but where's the smooth shades? Next, we've got one from Sachin. Well, there's no hand in this tattoo, so I think that's out of the running. Next, we have one from SRaw93 with this chest piece, and it looks like most of the focus is on the face or the lettering behind it, not so much focused on the hand or snakes. So I don't think that one's in the running either. Next, we have one from Kate. Now this is cool, I like this concept. It's nice to see something different. Super bold colors, lots of different styles going on. I'll keep a note of that one. Next up, we've got one from Elizabeth. All right, this one's nice. I don't think it's very striking. I think it could afford some lines here and there, but not bad. Also, the snake and hand are very similar in color, so it does get a little hard to read. Next up, we've got one from Isaiah. Well, straight and to the point, that's for sure. I like the idea of the apple tattooed on the hand. I just don't think it was executed as good as it could have been. Next up, we've got one from Steve. All right, this one's clean, that's for sure. I like the concept of the Polaroid pictures as well. It just adds something extra. Do I think it's worthy of a top 10? We'll make a note of it. Next up, we've got one from Mike with the old handshake snake tattoo. You can't go wrong. Well, in this case, you can go a little wrong. There are some wobbly lines here and there. The saturation is not as good as it could be. The lettering is just messy. Sometimes if you're not great with lettering, it's just best to leave those out. Next up, we've got one from Blink Tattoo. All right, again, I like this one. It is different. The pink ribbon I do wish had a better flow, but I do appreciate the tattoo on the wrist. Very much a Christmas snake. I'll make a note of this one. Up next, we've got one from Colin. I appreciate the attempt on this one. It does get a little messy. I wish the hand had an outline around it to set itself forward from all the rest of the stuff that's going on. And there's 1,000,001 colors in this tattoo. Sometimes you gotta stick with the color theme and just run with it. Next, we've got one from Jon. This one is clean. The hand does get a little lost with the snake's tongue. I don't know why the shades just don't go through that tongue, but for some reason, that's where my eyes go on this tattoo. It's not a bad tattoo by any means. I just don't know if it's top 10 worthy. Up next, we've got one from Stan. This one's pretty rough. When it comes to the technical application of this tattoo, it's just a bit lackluster for me. Ricky's next with this, well, I did say hand and snake. It's a fun approach, I just don't think the design is that great. Up next, we've got one from Rooster, and Rooster he sent over, all right, this one's not bad. I do love the colors in the snake, and I think they play really well with the yellow in the gauntlet. So good job. We'll keep this one aside for now. Up next, we've got one from Skyler. I love this tattoo. I think it has all the right elements to make a solid neo-traditional tattoo. Everything's crisp and clean. I'm definitely gonna put this one aside. Up next, we've got one from Timothy, and another handshake snake. I kind of expected that, to be honest. This one's clean, no lettering is nice. It's just nothing crazy. Although I do like this style, I imagine I'm gonna see a bunch of these, so it's not really original. The next two are from Hailey. The first one is this green, unique looking snake. We'll call it that. I don't know how long of a shelf life that snake has. It's just a lot of light colors and a lot of tiny little detail. I can't imagine that thing staying around forever. And the fingernails are a bit rough. The black and white one is nicer in my opinion. It just doesn't have that striking factor. I'm gonna have to pass on this one. Tash sent two as well. The first one is this black and gray snake in hand, go figure. The negative space smoke kind of kills this one for me. It just doesn't have any real flow to it. It cuts over the hand in a weird spot. I think this one could be cleaner. This other one you sent over is much nicer. The pearls are great, the snake looks wonderful, but the background does look a little rushed. However, I'm gonna put a pin in this one. Next one up is from Tré. Tré, I don't hate this one. It is different, I'll say that, so it is a very creative approach. I'm just not sold on the technical side of things. And up next, we've got one from Paisley. I do really like the colors in this snake, but that's about it. There's just something I'm not really a fan of about this one. It doesn't really have any weight. Next one up is from Matthew. All right, this one's crystal clear, that's for sure. The details in the snake are really cool. It just loses it for me with the shape of the apple and where that snake is entering through the hand. Next up, we've got one from Joseph. Those colors are popping. However, that hand doesn't really look like a hand. It looks like more of the focus is on the skull. I gotta pass on this one. The next one comes from Aiden, and another handshake snake. Again, I love the idea. I just think it could use something extra. Adam Blair sent in two. This first one, I'm wondering what is up with that hand. That is one long palm, sir. Again, I think more of the focus is on the flowers and not so much the snake in the hand, which is unfortunate. But maybe you were just trying to hide that weird ass palm. The next one he sent over is this hand and dagger and cobra. It looks like hands are not your forte, which is why I picked this challenge. I knew it would be difficult. Next one comes from Erica, and I do really love this style. Hell, my whole entire back is pretty much this style. But the snake head is a little goofy to me. I wish you spent just a bit more time up there. Up next, we've got one from Austin. And Austin, I do appreciate the attempt at the gold apple. Maybe you should have waited to take a photo until that stopped bleeding, because youch. It is a bit painterly. I do wish it were a bit more bold, but not a bad design. Up next, we've got one from Josh. This one definitely reminds me of like 90s graffiti, but not in a great way. I see a lot of saturation issues, and I do wish there were a lot more black shading in that hand. Up next, we have one from Jon. And Jon, you sent over this very painterly looking hand and snake with the apple above it. This kind of reminds me of the tattoo I did on Inkmaster. I see what you're doing here, but I do think this is painterly in a good way. I'll put a pin in this one. Up next, we've got one from Dan. And Dan, this is cute. I wish the hand and snake was a lot bigger. It just seems like you went kind of crazy with all these other elements and you didn't really put the focus where it belongs. Next one's from Big Oso. And Big, yeah, I'm not sure this one's quite top 10 material. Up next, we've got one from Josh. And Josh, the blue in this tattoo is very solid. The hand kind of got away from me a bit. I'm just not sure where all these shades are going. That hand it just loses it for me. But I do like the concept. Next up, we've got one from North Star. And this thing's lacking a lot of black. These colors would be a lot more impactful had you had some black shading. Up next, we've got one from Abbie. I like the apple in this tattoo. Snake is a little weird, the hand is a little weird, and that's the main subject matter. So unfortunately, I gotta pass on this one. We've got one from Travis coming in, and I wish there were some shading in the hand on this tattoo because it literally loses itself with the client's skin tone. The snake's not bad, but you really gotta look at this thing for like 5 seconds to know what's going on. Next up is Jean, AKA Bunny. It's there, it's fine. Nothing crazy. Yeah. Next. Up next, we've got one from Orville. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I wanted to see. It's got great composition, it's got a great color scheme. Nice job, Orville. Definitely putting a pin on that one. And next, we've got one from Natalie with this little ice cream snake in hand. I'm not sure what the purple is. I don't know if I would eat that ice cream, but the strawberry heart is super adorable. I mean, this thing is super cute. I love the tattoos on the hands, especially the snake on the pinky. Very nice touch. I'm just a little underwhelmed, I guess, but I do really love the idea. Up next, we've got one from Shaun. This one is solid. The chrome effect on the gauntlet is a cool idea. I just don't know if it's enough to make it to the top 10. Up next is one from Shaun. And this is definitely scary. I would probably pee my pants if I saw her. But again, the focus is not on the hand and snake. The hand is, 15% of it. so I'm gonna have to pass on this one. Next up, we've got one from Monico. This one is definitely readable. It's just missing a lot of dynamic factors. It all kind of feels like the same tone of black. But cool idea, and I think it was a decent execution. Next up, we've got one from Payton. I don't really know how I feel about this one. It's nothing crazy. It is huge. The way the hand is ripped off, it kind of reminds me of a Burger King French fry, maybe Wendy's. There's just not much dynamic about this one. Next up, we've got two from Jared. This first one is a decent idea. I do love the idea of the hand pulling off the sticker. I think that's pretty rad. I think the sticker was done pretty well for the most part, but I think you really lost it when it comes to that hand. The shape isn't bad, I just think you need some help when it comes to the shading itself. I think the same thing could be said about this one. I do really like the snake. I like those little pieces of white that you have almost like glittering through the entire thing, but the hand just falls short for me, especially where that hole is. It doesn't really look three-dimensional. It's just a flat hole. Up next is one from Kyle, and Kyle, I gotta give it to you for attempting the gold effect. It is very difficult, but the black in the background just kind of loses it for me, and those fingers look a little sus, but I appreciate the attempt. Next one up is from Julian, and Julian, I absolutely love the idea of the hand transitioning into the snake, but the black background does feel a bit dated, and if you were going to tackle that black background, I would try to make it a lot stronger, because it just feels like it's starting to fall apart. Up next, we've got a couple from Logan, and this first one, much like the other one that we saw that was very similar to this, I love the reds and greens. I think those colors really contrast well with each other, but I do think there's a lot of strong features missing. You know, a heavy black outline around some of these parts, and use some thinner outline where the snake goes back, and to those fingers that are sitting in the background, I think you could have played with it a lot more. This next one you sent over, I think is a really cool idea, how the snake itself is the flail. But again, I think it's just lacking in a few departments. With this one in particular, I think you could have used a bit more black shading. The chain does look realistic, so I do love the multiple styles that you put into this thing. It just falls a little short for me. Up next, we've got one from Lester. And Lester, this thing is very colorful. It is a very unique approach to the hand and snake tattoo. It's just not one of my favorites. And next we've got one sent in from Sophia. And Sophia, I do like the attempt of this snake looking almost electric or transparent even, but it does get a little hard to read, I will say. That ain't it. That's not it, Sophia. Moving on. Next, we've got one sent in from Carlos. I gotta say I'm not the biggest fan of this one. I don't really know what's going on in the background, and when it comes to the hand and snake, it does get a bit muddy. Next, we've got one sent in from Rebecca. Rebecca, this snake is a bit rough. It just seems like you put in a lot of colors kind of all over the place, you know, like the teal background, the yellow and green, I guess we'll call that like lightning. There's just a lot going on. Next, we've got one sent in from Lady Paraffin. Again, another unique approach. I do see a lot of saturation issues, especially when we look at that purple. And although I like the design of the hand, it does get a bit hard to read. Next up, we've got one from Jake. And Jake, I do really love the snake, but everything else just kind of falls flat for me. Next up, we've got one sent in from Roger. And Roger, I do really love the way you applied this hand. You've got the black shading underneath those colors. It almost gives it that Baroque-esque feel. Not the biggest fan of the swirls in the background or leaves, but I will put a pin in this one. Next up, we've got one sent in from Kareem. And this is a rib piece tattoo, which I know had to hurt like hell. I do like when people throw in something creative. You know, you've got the body of the snake on the bottom, and then you've got the skeletal version of it coming through the hand. So I can appreciate that. You've got some decent shading in the hand. It's just not leaving me saying, wow. Next up, we've got one from Eric. And Eric, I'm very curious what's on that apple. I don't know if it's honey, gold, or some other liquid. This whole thing kind of just blends together. There's no real separation, especially from the finger to the apple. It all kind of just looks like one flat image. And next up, we've got one from Nicole. So I like the idea of the red hand, but everything application-wise just falls short. Especially when you look at the white outline around the hand, I think that could have been a lot cleaner. Up next, we've got one from Braden. And Braden, these photos are not great, which is fine because I don't think there's really a lot happening in this tattoo. The hand kind of reminds me of those caramel apple suckers from what I can see of it. Sorry, buddy, you gotta make sure you send in better photos next time. From Braden to Jaden, Jaden sent over this black and gray. I kind of like this like fractal looking tattoo. I love the idea that you can see some of these diamond shapes behind the other diamond shapes. There's a lot of cool effects happening here. I do think the snake scales kind of get lost, especially on the right side, but you got a lot of good elements in this tattoo, so I'll put a pin in it. And next we've got one from Jory. Jory, interesting take. It looks like it says the word fuck coming out of the snake's mouth. Edgy. Oh, I see. It says fuck around and find out. Well, I think you fucked around too much because this one's hard to read. Interesting take though. Next, we've got one from Remington. And Remington, you sent over this, what I assume is a cobra. It does get a little hard to read in there. Some of the shapes of the snake, I can't really tell what's going on. Yeah, I'm sorry, Remington, this one's just not doing it for me. Next up, we've got one sent in from Eddie. And Eddie, solid tattoo. I love the contrast of shading in the snake to the lack of shading in the hand. This one's pretty cool. It's a solid tattoo, and I like the fact that you didn't pack in a bunch of shit to get judged on. We'll put a pin in this one. And next, we've got one from Brandon. And Brandon, I like the idea of this green hand. I love the little three-liner textures you've got in there. This one almost feels empty, though. I almost wish there were more shading in the background. It is solid, though. And next, we've got one from Pete. And Pete, the background on this one is awfully messy. I'm pretty sure you were going for the texture of a snake. I just don't think you nailed it. I will say I like how you have the texture in the thumb though. Up next, we've got one from Jason. And Jason, you sent over a black and gray Medusa face biting an apple. I don't love it. The shading all over is rather messy. Up next, we've got one from Trevor. And Trevor, I do appreciate the creativity that you put into this one, how you have the inverted photo where you can see the true colors. But as far as the application goes, it's not bad by any means. It's just not next level. Next, we've got one from Sarah. And Sarah, this one's pretty basic, nothing crazy. It is pretty tonal, but I like the texture that you managed to pull off in the snake. Coming in next is one from Mario. And Mario, I don't really love this one either. It doesn't seem like you put in a whole lot of creativity or solid shades for that matter. Not a bad tattoo by any means, but I just can't see it in the top 10. Amanda sent in two. This first one seems a bit light. It doesn't seem like this thing is going to be around for very long. I like the concept, just not so much the application. The other one you sent in is also pretty light. I do think you need to start using some solid blacks to keep these things around for a while. It is a cool design and I love the shades on the hand, but I'm not the biggest fan of how you put the whites in the sky in the background. It doesn't really need it, and it's just lacking a lot of depth. Next up, we've got one from Jeremy, and Jeremy, this thing is 90s AF. It's not a fan of this one all around. A lot of weird textures, a lot of weird shades. Not really great composition, but you did nail contrast. Sammy's next with this teal and orange snake and a tattooed hand. I gotta say you did an excellent job when it comes to the color scheme. It's a great tattoo, it just doesn't have a lot of impact. Dalton sent in the next one, and these colors are kind of crazy. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I do like how you separated the client's skin tone from the hands with that red background, but this one's just not for me. Next up is Amber, and Amber, I like the concept of this tattoo, how the snake is making this really evil looking shadow, but it is a bit goofy. The hand doesn't really have any great structure, and those gotta be press-on nails. Next up is Tempe, and Tempe, you sent over this, this one looks pretty amateur. I would say this is a beginning apprentice tattoo. It's not it. Lazarus is up next with this interesting looking combination. Another ripped off hand, not super original, but the colors of this one are just all over the place. There's not really any good flow or composition. It's just all kind of thrown in there. Up next, we've got one from Cloudin. And Cloudin, this one's a bit dark. I don't know if it's just the photo or what, but there's a lot of blacks in this thing. Almost too much. And the head of the snake looks huge compared to that body. From what I can see, you've got some nice shades in that hand though. Maybe just next time leave out the whites. Chris is up next, and Chris, that's a pretty solid tattoo. You can really tell you took your time with all those little dots on the snake. They're damn near perfect. And I love the combination of semi-realism with that almost neo-traditional-like snake. I think I'll put a pin in that one. Cole is up next with this demon-looking tattoo. Biting a snake is what it looks like. This thing is huge. The snake does get a little lost for me up on the forehead, but I like the facial details you've got in there, and the same thing could be said for the hand. I do wish more of the focus was on the hand and snake and not so much on the face, but not a bad tattoo by any means. I think I'll put a pin in that one. Marie's up next with this cute little mouse tattoo, and oh, never mind, it looks like he's about to be lunch. I think this is a pretty solid tattoo. I do wish the picture were a little bit better because it seems like there's a lot of glares happening, especially throughout the black shading, but it does get a little complicated at the bottom where you have all these little pearls, and there's just a lot happening at the bottom. Next up is Kimberly, and Kimberly, pretty solid tattoo. Not much for composition, but not a bad tattoo. I don't know if it's enough to make it to the top 10 though. Up next is one from Tekka, and next up is Scott. And Scott, you sent over this realistic looking colored hand and the traditional snake. Great combination, pretty smooth execution. I think the knife could be a bit smoother. I think that's the only thing I don't really like, but overall, not a bad tattoo. I think I'll put a pin in that one as well. Next up is Skyler, and Skyler, you sent over this black and gray whimsical looking tattoo. The snake is cool. The hand's all right. I like the lettering that you have throughout this tattoo, kind of shows you the diagram. I'm trying to turn my hand in the same direction of the tattoo, and it does seem a little impossible. Everybody at home, try it yourself. I don't think I'm that crazy. Next, Matt sent in a small handful. As far as traditional tattoos go, I like the style, I just don't think the execution is there. This is definitely some 60s traditional. Again, I just don't think the application is 100% there. Same thing with this next one. I mean, I love the artwork, I'm just not sold on the application. And same thing could be said about this one. I just don't think it's enough to win a top 10 spot. Corey's up next with this pretty solid looking tattoo. It looks like the client's got some cold or turkey-like skin, but we'll look past that. The shape of the snake is cool, and you've got some solid multiple line weights in this thing. I'll have to put a pin in this one for sure. Up next is Willow with this Renaissance looking style of tattoo. Now I think you get away with a lot in a style like this because you don't really have to put in those line weights. You've got some really nice features. It is a very nice tattoo, but I don't know if it quite hits the mark. Kurt is up next with this handshake snake, and we've seen a couple of these before, but I like how you've got the realistic hand with the traditional snake. I think that's a very cool cool touch. However, the shading on the hand just doesn't really hit home for me. I think it could definitely be tidied up and a bit smoother, but the traditional snake is very solid. Nikki is up next, and this thing is, well, I don't really know what's going on. I don't know if this is a snake or something that I saw in my dad's magazines that he kept next to the toilet years ago, and the technical application definitely needs some work. Zach is up next, and this hand looks awfully weak. Same thing could be said for the body of the snake. There's just not really any strength in this tattoo. There's nothing holding this thing together. And I don't know what's happening on the elbow. Steven is next, and this thing looks pretty red. Looks like an old hand. There are a lot of wrinkles, that's for sure. That background is just a mess though. Johnny's up next with the snake and golden apple trick. Gotta say this one's pretty solid. There are a couple small saturation issues here and there, but for the most part, I dig this thing. We'll put a pin in that one. Drew's up next, and Drew, this thing's not bad. I really like the snake, but the hand is just, I'm getting lost in the hand. The way the snake is weaving through those fingers is also just a bit unbelievable, but I will give you props on the snake. That is my favorite part. Kelsey's up next. This thing's dainty, probably the world's smallest flower tattoo. I really think he could have gone bigger on this thing. It's just small, so there's not really much room to pack a lot of detail. Chris is up next with this glowing blue snake. Everything is readable. It's just lacking something, and I can't put my finger on it. Maybe some black. Yeah, I'm sorry, this one's, it's not bad, it's just not for me. Peach is up next with this, another golden apple. I like how you put the shine on the snake, I think that's a cool touch, but this tattoo just looks like there's not a whole lot of experience behind the artist. It does look like you took a lot of time with the texture in that snake, but I think that time probably would have been better placed elsewhere. Greg is up next with this prison snake. Fingers look a bit cubed for some reason, and the way the snake is folding over itself just seems pretty flat. Lee is up next with this, it's an interesting take. I think this is a really cool idea. I just don't know if there's enough there to take home the prize. Esteban, you're up next. I don't really know what's happening here. It looks like the snake's body just kind of cuts off and reappears in the back of the hand. Am I looking at this wrong? It's just like I don't know, like a weird portal, and it's also not the best application. Jordy's up next with this very bold and vivid hand palm snake thing. The colors are great. I just think the way the snake's body is folded or cut is a little weird. I think this is a very solid tattoo. I just don't really know what's happening at the bottom of this thing. Brandy is up next, and this thing's not bad. It doesn't really have a whole lot of impact, but it is a pretty nice tattoo. I think you could take it to another level though. Abraham is next with this, it's an interesting one. The fingers in the background are a bit odd. They don't really seem believable, and the overall application is just not there. Maria, you're up next. Now I do like the creativity that you have with these like finger rings. I think those are pretty cool, but it just doesn't have any dynamic pop, and that snake's neck is peculiar, and that thumb is short. Felix is next. I gotta say I'm not the biggest fan of the background or the shape. The hand is a little weird. It's strange how you have gray in the wrist and the rest of the hand is like this light peach color. I don't know, just not a fan. Frederick's coming in hot with this nice little gold edition. I think it could be a bit stronger, but you're pulling at my heartstrings here. I think you did a great job when it comes to that gold effect. The fingers are a little wonky, but not enough for me not to put a pin in that one. Cass is next, and that's nice. This thing's nice. Great use of background and foreground. Complementary colors left and right. I definitely gotta put a pin in that one. Austin's up next with this. I would assume this is supposed to be gold. Not really sure. This is a weird one, and we're gonna leave it at that. Tate's up next, and this thing is, it's a bit sloppy, Tate, I'm sorry. There's just not any great contrast, and it almost seems like you just really overused the white. Up next is one from Shaun, and Shaun, you sent over this beautiful looking neo-traditional style tattoo. I like this tattoo. I think it's just missing that punch. Next one up is from Jean, and Jean, again, I like this tattoo, but I think everything kind of gets lost together with the same exact color scheme. You have the same colors in the gauntlet as you do in the snake, and it all kind of just blends together. Justin's up next with this half sticker, half patch tattoo. I could be wrong, but I think you're going for a little bit of pony style in there. Not bad. I think it's executed nicely. It's just missing some contrast for me. But I do love the mashup, and I think you killed it. Coming up next is Dylan, and Dylan, this is a pretty clean tattoo. It's one of those tattoos that aren't mind-blowing, but it is done very well. It's definitely a solid tattoo. I just feel like it's missing something. Josh is up next with this traditional snake and handshake. I think if you're gonna do a tattoo like this, you really gotta step outside the box and do something different. Because when it's yours compared to the next, to the next, to the next, they all kind of just fall in line. James is up next with this realistic red apple, and this one's just lacking a lot of detail for my personal taste, and the round background is just not helping this thing out at all. Archangel Villanueva is up next, and again, I'm not super surprised with the snake handshake. This one is also done very well, but if you're trying to earn a spot in the top 10, I feel like it's just a little underwhelming. Justin's up next and I think this thing could definitely use some work. I like the playful colors you have and how there's the hearts inside of the snake's back, but it just seems to be lacking a lot. Whether that be background color or just some really good composition, it feels unfinished. Up next is Deshaun. And Deshaun, again, I think this one's just a bit underwhelming. I think you could have really benefited from the use of multiple line weights, especially up near the top where that hand is coming forward. I think a nice thick outline would have looked really cool up there. And it's just an odd shape overall. It looks like it's almost putting itself in a knot. Ventura's up next, and this one's a bit rough, Ventura. I'm not gonna say much about this one. I just think you need to put your nose to the grindstone and really iron out those fundamentals. Next one in is from Utkarsh, and Utkarsh, I like this tattoo. There's just a lot of black, and the black that is there is slightly undersaturated. But I think you did a bang-up job on the hand. I would have just traded out that black background for something else. Up next is one from Sentex Killer, and we've got another snake handshake, although this one's in black and white, and I gotta say I'm not the biggest fan of the lettering. As I said before, any little mistake shows in lettering, so you gotta make sure that you button it up tight. Eric's the next one up, and Eric, you sent over this very interesting looking hand and snake combination with some eyeballs coming out of the hand. I do love the dynamic pose of the hand and how the wrist almost turns into this monster's mouth. It's just lacking a lot of contrast from my personal taste. Up next, we've got one from Mara, and Mara, this one seems a bit weak. And I'm mainly talking about all the stuff in the background. I'm not sure what that line is on the left. Doesn't seem like it really needs to be there. The reds in the apple could afford to be punched up a bit, just really push those reds in there. But not a bad job by any means. Carlos is up next with this very bold red hand and snake. Gotta say I like this one quite a bit. It keeps my eye moving throughout the entire piece. And from top to bottom, this thing is well executed. Definitely gotta put a pin in that one. Jamie's up next with this blue snake and red, what I assume are devil hands. Good contrast, not so great background. All the background and those little black leaves just really feel like an afterthought. Coming up next is Jasmine with this black and gray piece, and I gotta say my eyes get a little bit lost when it comes to the fingers underneath the snake's head. I gotta say it's coming off a bit tonal. I feel like you can use some extra shading or maybe even some thicker line weights here and there. Pete with another handshake. I gotta say this is one of my least favorite as far as the handshakes go. It just seems pretty basic for lack of better words. And the black shading in the hand is just a bit weird. Bailey's up next with this interesting looking monster mashup. Gotta say I love the idea, but it is a bit dark. I understand the style and I know it's meant to be dark, I just don't think it holds a spot in the top 10. Tyler's up next, and Tyler, you threw in an ace of spades and a two-headed snake. Color choices are a bit weird, as well as the background, how it's kind of just all circular. There's no real flow on this one, although the snake itself does have flow, it doesn't really go with the body that well. And I think it could really use some extra blacks. Aaron sent in a handshake snake as well, and at least this one is a different take, but I'm not a fan of the execution. This one just falls short for me, it almost feels like a foot. Sarah sent over a crumbly looking, possibly gold hand and snake, and this one just seems pretty amateur. There's no real strength in the entire tattoo, there's not an outline to be seen, or any solid black shading for that matter. Elise is up next. Elise, this one's not terrible. It is a bit weird. It almost feels like these two tattoos don't belong together. There's not really any shadows coming from the snake onto the hand or anything that would lead me to believe that that snake is sitting in the hand. And then the snake's tongue up top with the stars just really feel disconnected. Kahela's up next with this nun, and I gotta say the first thing that really throws me off is the way that the ring finger is sitting on top of the nose. It almost makes it look like the nose is the finger. This one's just lacking a lot of fundamentals as well, especially when we go to the snake's body. It just seems like those textures are just thrown in there. Megan's the next one up with this golden apple and hand transitioning into a snake. I do wish the apple itself had a lot darker shades to it, some darker browns or even blacks, to really help make that thing look metallic. I think this tattoo could have used some extra elements as well, something like some cherry blossoms or some other flower to really help keep this thing moving. Megan also sent over this black and white lady face. The face, I gotta say, is pretty dark, and the hand and snake at the bottom are pretty light. It just feels like you might be afraid of commitment on this one. Logan's up next. This thing is fairly solid. You got some good lines in there, some decent shades. It does come off a bit tonal. It is a bit hard to read, and the texture in the snake's back is just a bit underwhelming. Kale sent the next one over, and although I do like the colors in this tattoo, the blues especially, I don't think it really goes that well with the blacks that are in the scales. It almost seems like it's transitioning from this smooth blue shading to this weird blue diamonds to these black scales. It's just not selling that illusion. But I weirdly like the little U tattoo on the wrist. Maddie's up next, and Maddie sent over this pretty solid half neo-traditional, half, I don't know what you'd call it. It almost has that color realism effect in the rose, but maybe not quite. The vine is very well saturated and I love the color. The snake is pretty well done, but I do wish the snake's belly was a different color than the tone of the hand. But this thing is well done, so I'm gonna go ahead and pin this one. Missy L sent over this black and gray realistic hand and snake. The photo is a bit dark, I gotta say. I wish I could see this thing in a brighter light, but for what you have, it's not bad. It's just on the simpler side of things. Dane is up next with this, what I believe is a witch hand. Not bad. It seems like it goes with the collector's current tattoos, but it is just a bit drab. Evan is up next, and I gotta say this this tattoo is pretty rock solid. I love how you didn't overdo it with the apple, but you still managed to put in those darker shades to really give it some sort of spherical shape. The hand is done well, you've got some nice outlines, the snake's belly is, you can't really beat it. I gotta go ahead and pin this one as well. Chris is up next with this traditional hand-in snake. To me, this one's just lacking a lot of fundamentals. There's not really any strong suit of this tattoo. It's just all right. Next up is one from Tombstone Tattoo with this highly reflective black and gray chrome hand and snake. I appreciate the attempt, but I don't think you quite nailed it. And I understand these tattoos are very difficult. I'm just having a hard time believing that this is a real hand with a real chrome snake. Brittany's next with this black and gray lady face eating an apple. I gotta be honest, I didn't really see the lady face at first, and I hate to keep saying things are tonal, but when it is, it is. I think you really had the chance to play with different values and tones in this tattoo, and as it sits, it just falls short. William sent over this pretty red tattoo. It's black and gray with a touch of red. It's got some really nice elements throughout the entire thing. I love the way the hand is shaded, as well as these neo-traditional-esque leaves at the bottom. And the way that those leaves are cut out, I think that's super unique. I like how the fingers almost match the texture in the snake's back as well. This one's pretty dope. Gotta put a pin in it. Noel's coming up next, and I gotta say this one's not the greatest I've seen, by a long shot. It's weird, the bite of the apple almost looks like it's sitting outside of the apple, like the shadows are in the wrong place. The background just isn't doing it for me. The lack of confidence in the hand as well, it's just not there. Ziva's next with this, I'm assuming she's some sort of famous lady, eating a green, yellow, and red apple. This one just comes off a bit messy to me. You know, the rectangle in the background isn't really rectangular. The shades in the hair have this weird green that doesn't look like it belongs. The apple is 3 different colors, and although I know apples can be 3 different colors, there's just no smooth transition. And can we really call this a hand tattoo? Come on. Hailey's up next with this black and gray, straight and to the point, snake in hand. Nothing crazy about this one. It is executed pretty well, but I don't think it's enough to secure that spot. Next up is Tony, who sent over 2 tattoos. This first one's not bad. There is a lot going on, and this thing is also very huge. The golds do play well with the teals, but I feel like it's just missing a lot of black shades. It's really missing that pop factor. The other one you sent over is very interesting. I'm just curious about the black dotted background. It just feels, again, incomplete. I don't know. I do like the concept though. Seth sent over a black and gray hand and snake with a red rose. Now I wish that red rose were a lot more realistic, and that index finger looks a little chubby, and it almost looks like the other leaf coming from the rose. I feel like you definitely could have tidied up this design a bit. It's just not reading super clear. Up next, we've got one from Mono, or Mono. I do love the concept of this tattoo. How the snake is almost turning into a brushstroke. The letters on the side are a nice touch, and I love the contrast between the red hand and the black snake. However, I do feel like it's lacking quite a bit in the dynamic range department. I think it's cool, I just don't think it's enough to secure a spot. Ray Ray's coming at you with this black and gray torn off hand, and I gotta say this one is pretty believable. This might be one of the better realistic hands we've seen so far. The transition from the snake's scales to the black shading does seem to cut off a bit early, but I'm nitpicking. I'll go ahead and put a pin in this one. It's really not too bad. Jordan Love with this cute little new school-esque tattoo. This one's kind of like a quick in and out walk-in tattoo. Nothing too crazy, it is what it is. Jaden's up next with another apple tattoo, and I gotta say the same thing about this one as I've said about numerous others. There's just a lack of contrast. I think the apple could have definitely been a bit darker, and I don't mean black, I just mean some sort of shade darker that's darker than the hand. Play with some shadows here and there. I think it could really use it, especially on the bottom by the wrist, coming from underneath the snake's body, but overall, not a bad tattoo. Paint Rags coming at you. The colors of this hand are a little weird. I know that's a stylistic choice. I just don't know if I jive with it. The line work is pretty solid, and I do love those oranges. I just don't think it's enough. Wes Morris is up next, and this is another one that's a little hard to read because the background is the same tone as the snake, or almost same color, I should say. The teeth almost most definitely get lost in the background. Having those skin tone would have made a huge difference, but not bad. I like the leaves at the bottom. Up next is Nelson. Nelson, I do think this concept could have been designed a bit better. Everything kind of just comes together up near those leaves. I can't really tell what's the snake, what's a leaf, because they're all the same tone. Not a bad job, but I do think the shading could have been smoothed up a bit as well. Alice is up next, and Alice, I gotta say, the background on this tattoo is a bit weird. It almost reminds me of the Godsmack logo. And just all that weird medium gray shading that's coming off of that Godsmack sun isn't helping. It's almost a distraction, like I can't even really see the hand and snake after that, which aren't bad. Jimmy's up next, and Jimmy, that's a rough one, my friend. I think this tattoo needs a lot of fundamentals. I think you need to learn how to apply these stencils because the diamond just appears very off. There's nothing really strong about this tattoo, and it just looks like an at-home tattoo. It almost looks like E.T. when I zoom in. Shy's up next with this interesting take. The painterly background is a unique touch. I don't love it. And the shades on the hand are a bit weird, and I also feel like I've seen that snake reference 1,000 times. Letty's up next with this very sound traditional tattoo. There's not much for me to say about this tattoo. It is applied very well. This is exactly what you'd expect from a solid traditional tattooer. I'll put a pin in this one, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to make it to the end. And Shayla's up next. This tattoo is fairly sound for the most part. I do think those back fingers could be strengthened up a bit more, but I like the snake. I think it is playing with the hand really well. Corey's coming at you with this tattoo that is also lacking a lot of fundamental skill. These lines are super shaky, and even in some areas, they're almost gouged out. This one definitely needs a lot of work. The next one's coming from Ray, and Ray, I gotta say, I really love this concept. You really thought out of the box on this one. However, I don't think it's applied that well. I gotta give you an A+ for creativity. I don't think I would have thought of this, but it's just lacking in a few departments and I can't see it making through to the top. Up next, we've got one from Breezia, and Breezia, this one also needs some work. The shading that's in the hand, especially coming down from the snake shadow, is awfully choppy. It just really seems like you rushed through this one. Composition does fit well on the leg, but there's just a lot of issues here. Meredith is up next with this very solid looking hand and dagger. I love the way this tattoo plays with the existing tattoos. How the blade of that dagger is going underneath that moth or butterfly, and it's just applied very well. Gotta put a pin in this one. Up next, we've got one from Christian, and Christian, although the apple is pretty realistic, the entire thing is fairly boring. I like the idea you took with the albino blue snake, but there's just not one focal point in this tattoo. I'm not sure if it's the snake, the hand, the apple, or the face. And it definitely seems a bit unfinished at the top. Nash coming through with a super solid, I guess I'd call that traditional snake in hand. Love the colors, I think that's applied very well. Yeah, I don't hate this one. I'll definitely have to put a pin in this one. Nathan's up next, and Nathan, I gotta say, this just seems like your run-of-the-mill tattoo. There's not really much special about it. I mean, I do appreciate the tattoo on the back of the hand, but I don't think that's enough to carry this one to the top. Jennifer is coming at you with this lantern. Not bad, definitely not great. The composition is really what kills me on this one, how everything is just very perpendicular to the arm. Our bodies have a nice natural contour. You try to fit these tattoos accordingly. Next up is Carlos, and this thing is pretty solid. I do think it's lacking a good amount of blacks and maybe even some line weights, because it seems like everything is sitting on the same plane. I don't think this is a bad tattoo by any means. I just wish there were more of a pop to it. Santi's next with this very unique take. I will say I love the creative play with this tattoo. How this snake head flows from coming out of the wrist into a tattoo on the wrist in a somewhat traditional style, going up to more playful, not quite realism, but there's a lot of fun elements in this tattoo. I'm just not sold on it. Darissa's up next, and Darissa, what is she doing with that snake? What do that mouth do? It's an odd one. The frame is fairly basic. It is lacking some saturation in areas here and there, and it's just an overall weird tattoo. Shaun's coming at us with a pretty decent one. I love the addition of the teals and the golden apple. It's not just one color range. I actually like how the pink nails match with the snake's belly, and the outlines are pretty solid overall, although the snake does get a little sloppy here and there. Not bad, but not quite good enough. Kevin with this interesting black and gray apple. I love how the apple actually does look chrome, but I'm not a fan of those white dots. It almost loses that chrome effect by having those white dots there. And also, not a huge fan of the black background. I've never been a fan of just putting it in there to give it contrast. Josh is up next, and Josh, I do think that this kind of just feels like 3 different tattoos slapped together. The hand is okay, everything else, not so much. Renato is the next one up, and Renato, I mean, I do like your approach at using a Pokemon rather than an actual snake. The hand does feel like a bit of an afterthought, like you just threw that in there to meet the challenge. But unlike the book says, I don't think you're taking this one home. Miroslava's up next, and Miroslava, this one is Mirosloppy. I'm just not a fan of anything in this tattoo. Not the ink drops, not the background, not the bracelet, not the snake. This one's just, it's not doing it for me. Austin Hill's next. Austin, not too bad. I do think the composition is a little weird. I don't know if it really flows with a leg that well, but as far as technical application goes, I think you're pretty solid. It just feels a bit stiff. Brandon's up next, and Brandon, I'm not sure if you tried to attempt the gold snake effect. If that's the case, I don't think you nailed it. It looks more like caution tape, telling you to stay away from this one. Yeah, just not a fan of the yellow in the snake or whatever effect that you were going for, or just the overall shape. Charlie's up next, and this one is sick. This is what I'm talking about when I say take the tattoo to the next level. This one is wild. Not much I can pick apart on this one. I love the shape of all the snakes. I love the red hand. It's super creative. It's got all the right elements. Definitely got to put a pin in that one. Raven's up next with this hand snake wine glass. And I gotta say the wine glass is a bit weak. It looks like I could shatter that thing with a flick of the finger. I don't think it was a very successful transparent effect when it comes to the snake on the backside of the glass. The whole thing just comes off as weak. The bottom looks decent. It's just mainly the top part of this tattoo that's killing it for me. Up next is Brittany, and this thing is Simple but solid. Super clean lines, pretty creative. I love how the snake turns into a tattoo on the hand. I also like how you put the shadows underneath the snake so it actually feels like it's sitting on top of the hand. Small trick, but big payoff. Again, this thing isn't too crazy, but it is done very well. I'll definitely put a pin in this one. The next one comes from Paul, and Paul, I gotta say, this thing comes off as pretty stiff. There's not a lot of solid flow in this tattoo, and the colors just seem pretty stale. Next up is Juan, and Juan, this one could definitely use some help. This one doesn't really have any solid technique anywhere. It just looks like it was rushed or just put in there just to finish the tattoo. Up next is one from Beth, and Beth, I don't hate this tattoo. I do wish there were more contrast in the apple and the hand themselves, because I think the snake is my favorite part of this tattoo. It's just really lacking when it comes to that hand and apple. Next up is Lori, and Lori, my first question is, what's up with that thumb? I like the concept of this tattoo, and I like how you have the green glow on the hand, but there's definitely some technical issues here. Kylie's up next, and Kylie, not really sure how I feel about this one. I don't love it. I wish the outlines around the hand were a bit stronger. Sometimes you can get away with using outlines and make it feel like those outlines aren't really there, but you need them to hold some sort of structure, and this tattoo could definitely use that. Chico's up next with another sticker tattoo. This one's fun, it's playful, it almost looks like Thing from the Addams Family. I don't think the sticker illusion is quite there. It just comes off as rather flat, even the fold, it's not working. One thing you could have done is add a bulge under the sticker where that snake is going through. Up next is Garrett. I can't hide the fact that I know Garrett, I know his work, it jumps out at me. This thing is super badass. I do wish there were a little more solid blacks, especially up in those back fingers and behind that thumb just a bit. That way it really pulls the front of the hand and snake forward a bit more. I don't know if it's enough to make it to the top 10, but I gotta be honest with myself and I gotta put a pin in this one. Damien's up next, and Damien, this is a weird one. That apple almost looks like a hoo-hoo, lots of blood. I think my favorite part about this tattoo is the snake's head and how it kind of comes off with that wispy tongue. But unfortunately, that's not enough to save this thing. Steven coming in with a unique one. I do love the gradient from that golden yellow to the bright orange. However, the snake's body itself, I'm not a huge fan of, but I do love the snake's head and how you have that red light coming out of the eye. Super interesting, just not one of my favorites I've seen today. Up next, we've got one from Kay Jones, and Kay, I will say this is definitely one of the more creative ones I've seen. Technically, not the biggest fan of the red background. It just feels a little choppy and like it's just there to set off the hand. But I do really dig this concept. I just don't know if it's enough to make it to the top 10. Nicole's up next with this very, we'll call it a painterly snake. It almost looks like a dragon. Definitely not a style that I'm a fan of. It lacks a lot of contrast. The tonal values in the blue and the green are pretty much just the same. If we bump the saturation down on this thing, I bet it would look almost identical. This one just seems a bit all over the place for me. Jacob's up next. Jacob, I feel like I can see where you were going with this one, but I don't know if you pulled it off that well. There's a lot of messy areas in this tattoo, but I do enjoy the concept of it. I just think you should slow down and take your time a little bit because this would be a badass tattoo. Chelsea's up next, and this tattoo, although solid, I feel like lacks quite a bit of contrast. To be honest, I don't really see any solid blacks in this tattoo other than the outlines. Those solid blacks could have been used in the ruffles of the fabric. It would have really set it apart from the hand. And the snake could have also benefited from having some solid blacks, or at least some 80% black in there. But not a bad job by any means. I think this thing is pretty solid. Next up, we've got Carlos with this color realism hand and green snake. So I really like the idea behind this one. The thing that does throw me off, and I get what's happening, but it looks like the snake's head doesn't connect to the body. I get that it's bending behind the finger, but it really sells me on the illusion that the hand is holding on to the snake. Also, that cuticle on that pointer finger it's in there, but not a bad job at all. I do think your saturation is on point. Mac is up next with this yellow snake holding on to what appears to be a vape pen. Pretty sure that's what that is. I think the snake is really well done, and I love the leaves that you have around this thing. I think they're executed very well. Not the biggest fan of the fingers or fingernails. Everything else seems pretty solid, but I really think you lose it with those fingers, and having the same tone of snake's belly against that black in the vape pen, it gets a little lost in there. Alyssa's up next with this hand and snake in a to-go box. Absolutely love the concept of this one. I do think it could use a bit more contrast, but this is just a really cool idea. The little shrimp is adorable. I would personally wear this tattoo. I'm just not sure if it's enough for the top 10. You did send over another one though, and I mean, again, same thing. This is done well. I wouldn't say extremely well, but you've definitely got some good foundational skills. The pink glasses on the snake are so rad. Even the bracelet around the wrist, super cool addition, nice little detail. But what loses it for me is the disco ball and how all those little squares aren't perfect. I really think you set yourself up for failure on that one because that's a tough ask. But overall, solid job. Again, I wouldn't complain if these tattoos were on me. Marissa's up next with another snake flail, or a double-headed snake flail, if you will. The front pointer finger does get a little wonky for me, and I'm not sure if it's just the angle of the photo, but those fingers do get awfully skinny. And I understand it's coming from possibly a witch or something like that, but just not thrilled about them. The snakes are okay. They do appear a little flat, like there's not really any depth in the two snakes, but not a bad job by any means. And we've got Donnie up next, and Donnie, this one is pretty tonal. I do think this thing could have been a bit bigger, and I would have worked around those tattoos just to have the room for that detail. But as it sits, it just feels a little small and cramped. Up next, we've got Matt with a black and gray hand and a white skeletal snake. Not exactly sure what's happening on the top of this tattoo. It seems like it's supposed to be gold. Not really sure. I do like the white skeletal snake, but where you lose it for me is the hand. I'm not sure what's going on with all the texture in the hand, especially on the thumb. I don't know if that was purposeful or if it's supposed to be something else. It's just a tough sell for me. Gabby's up next with this hand playing a snake piano. Interesting. Not sold on the technical application though. I think it is rather elementary, but not a bad idea. Up next is Renee, and Renee, this thing is pretty solid as well. I do notice a couple saturation issues up in the yellow moon, but overall I think the colors of this tattoo play really well with each other. It's not bad by any means, but it is a little underwhelming. Up next is Neil with a gauntlet and another snake flail. The gauntlet's not bad, it's solid. The snake head is a little weird. I don't mind the chain. It's just nothing crazy. I think you really could have sent it home with the gold embellishments on the flail's handle. Not a bad tattoo, I think this thing's well done. And we've got Yanni up next with this, what appears to be some sort of vase, maybe? Don't really know what's happening on this one. I see a blue snake and a hand, but the rest of it loses me. I don't know what's going on. I can see the bones going into whatever this object is, and that's where the skin comes back, but this one's leaving me for a loss. Last but not least is Gary, and I do work with Gary, but I do have to judge these tattoos honestly. I love the idea of the gold snake wrapped around the black and gray hand. The texture in the snake behind the finger does get lost a bit for me. It just seems like it loses texture and then picks back up again. I will say the eyeball is pretty dope, even though it's not perfectly circular. I do like this tattoo. I think it is applied very well. We'll have to put a pin in this one. That was a lot, but I'm glad you're still here. All right, before we get to my top 10, I do want to thank each and every one of you for participating. Just for taking the time out to be a part of this, I can't thank you enough. If you didn't make the top 10, don't worry, we will be having another competition at some point in the future. Now, to the good stuff. I will say it was very difficult to whittle all these down to a top 10. There were just so many good tattoos. Now this top 10 is in no particular order. The first spot is reserved for Skyler Miller. Spot number 2 has Orville's name all over it. Chris Mullins is another top 10. Corey Hand made its way in there as well. Johnny Rodriguez made it to the top 10. Cass Fuller and Carlos Valdez. Give yourselves a round of applause for making it to the top 10. Evan Lewis secured his spot. William Meyer also secured a spot in the top 10. And last but not least, Charlie Gould. Congratulations guys on making it to the top 10 out of over 200 submissions. Now before we get to my top 2 picks, which was insanely difficult, I gotta say out of the remaining top 8, we will be voting on YouTube within 48 hours of this video going live. So make sure you don't slack, check out all 8 submissions and give us your top 3. Please only vote once because this may get messy. Okay, the first artist locking in their spot for the finale here in Chicago is Orville. Congratulations, buddy. This tattoo was so dope. I loved it right off the bat. It's super clear, lots of neat little tricks here and there. Once again, congratulations. And locking in the second spot is Johnny Rodriguez. I absolutely loved the gold apple and your color scheme was top notch. Not to mention your application was killer. Once again, congratulations Johnny and Orville for locking down your spot in the final 3. And I cannot wait to see you guys compete. I'm going to reach out to these 2 artists and make sure that they can make it on the filming day, but if they can't, I will be going with your top 2 votes. So please make sure you vote. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end of the video. I know it was a long one. And once again, a huge thank you to all the sponsors who made this possible. We couldn't do it without you. See you soon.